The security captain's voice cut across the checkpoint like a blade meant to wound. "Stop right there. You're not coming through dressed like that." The old man in the donated coat and boots held together with electrical tape stood perfectly still. His eyes moved past the uniformed officer, past the metal detectors and credential scanners, past the families in press suits and summer dresses, until they found what they were looking for. The section of white chairs where, in exactly 2 hours, his son would receive the Naval Academy Athletic Association sword. He had walked 7 miles through the Maryland dawn to stand behind a tree and watch from a distance. He was not asking to sit with the families. He was not asking for recognition. He just needed to see the boy become an officer. What the security captain did not know, what no one at that checkpoint could possibly know, was that the man he was about to publicly humiliate had once held a bridge alone for 19 hours to save 47 Marines. And one of those Marines was now the keynote speaker, sitting in the VIP section not 300 yards away. Captain Derek Winslow stepped closer, positioning himself so the families in line could witness his authority. His uniform was immaculate, his brass polished to a mirror shine, his posture broadcasting the confidence of a man who had never once questioned his own importance. He looked the old man up and down with undisguised contempt. The coat was too large, clearly pulled from a donation bin. The boots were cracked leather wrapped with black electrical tape at the soles. The pants had been hemmed unevenly by hand. And the smell. Winslow wrinkled his nose. The smell was unmistakable. "I asked you a question," Winslow said, louder now, ensuring his voice carried to the watching crowd. "What exactly do you think you're doing here?" The old man's voice came out quiet, hoarse from disuse, but steady. "I'm not trying to enter the ceremony, sir. I just want to stand near the trees at the edge of the field. I will not bother anyone. I will not speak to anyone. I just want to watch." Winslow laughed. It was a theatrical sound, performed for his audience. "Watch. You want to watch?" He turned to the young petty officer manning the metal detector, making sure the sailor saw his amusement. "Did you hear that, Rodriguez? This gentleman wants to watch." The petty officer, a young man with close-cropped hair and careful eyes, did not laugh. He was studying the old man with an expression Winslow did not notice. Something about the way the vagrant stood, the precision of his stillness, the way his weight was balanced, even in those ruined boots, like a man who had spent decades learning exactly where to place his feet. "Sir," Rodriguez said quietly, "maybe we could just let him stand by the perimeter. He is not asking for much." Winslow's head snapped toward the young sailor. "Did I ask for your input, petty officer?" He turned back to the old man, his voice rising another notch. "We get your type every graduation. You know that? Every single year. Men who show up claiming they served, claiming they sacrificed, claiming they belong here." He stepped closer, close enough that the old man could smell the coffee on his breath. "You do not belong here." The old man said nothing. His hands, weathered and scarred across the knuckles, remained still at his sides. If Winslow had looked closely, he might have noticed the economy of the gesture. The complete absence of nervous movement. The stillness of a man who had learned to wait in positions for hours without shifting his weight or betraying his location. But Winslow was not looking closely. Winslow was performing. "Those dog tags," Winslow said, pointing at the chain barely visible beneath the old man's collar. "Let me guess. Army surplus store? $5. And you think it makes you a veteran?" The old man's fingers moved unconsciously to touch the tags through the fabric of his shirt. The movement was so subtle that only Rodriguez caught it. And Rodriguez felt something shift in his chest, because he had seen that gesture before. He had made that gesture himself, in moments when he needed to remember why he was still standing. "They are real, sir," the old man said quietly. Winslow snorted. "Sure they are. And I'm a Secretary of the Navy." He pulled out his radio, keying the mic with exaggerated deliberation. "This is Winslow at Checkpoint Alpha. I need additional security. We have a transient attempting to access the ceremony grounds. Possible mental health situation. Requesting backup for removal. If you're watching this story from anywhere in the world, we would love to know where you're joining us from. Drop a comment below and tell us your city or country. And if stories about courage, sacrifice, and second chances speak to you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us share more incredible true stories that honor the forgotten heroes among us. Now, let us continue. The old man did not protest. He did not argue or plead or raise his voice. He simply stood there, absorbing the public humiliation with a dignity that seemed to cost him nothing, as if he had endured far worse and survived. A woman in line, holding her young daughter's hand, spoke up. "Is this really necessary? He is not hurting anyone." Winslow turned on her with a practiced smile that contained no warmth. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but this is a security matter. Please remain in line and let us handle it." 3 more security officers were approaching now, summoned by the radio call. They walked with the purposeful stride of men expecting trouble. The old man watched them come without expression. His eyes moved briefly to the tree line at the edge of the field, calculating the distance, and then back to the officers closing in. Rodriguez stepped slightly to the side, positioning himself where he could see the old man's left arm. The sleeve of the donated coat had ridden up just slightly during the confrontation, and Rodriguez could see something on the weathered skin beneath. Dark ink, faded by decades and sun. He could not make out the design, but he could see what looked like numbers, coordinates, and something else, something that made his blood run cold. He had seen that style of tattoo before, in photographs, on a wall, in a place where legends were remembered. Sir Rodriguez said, his voice urgent now. "Wait. Just wait." Winslow ignored him. The 3 backup officers had arrived, forming a semicircle around the old man. Winslow's voice carried across the checkpoint, loud enough for every family in line to hear. "This is what happens when you try to crash a military ceremony. This is what happens when you pretend to be something you are not." He reached out and grabbed the old man's arm. And that was when everything began to unravel. Because when Winslow's grip pulled the sleeve back, Rodriguez saw the full tattoo clearly for the first time. Coordinates in precise military notation. A date, 11/15/06. A small trident beneath. And initials that meant nothing to Winslow, but meant everything to anyone who had ever studied the most famous last stands in naval special warfare history. Rodriguez's hand began to shake, because if this was who he thought it was, then the security captain who was currently dragging this homeless man toward the detention area had just made the worst mistake of his entire career. 6 years. That was how long it had been since Franklin Everett Cobb had spoken to his son. 6 years since he had heard Marcus call him Dad. 6 years since he had walked out of their home in Virginia Beach with nothing but a duffel bag and a note left on the kitchen table. The note had said 3 things. "I love you. I am sorry. Do not look for me." He had written those words at 4 in the morning while Marcus slept in his childhood bedroom, home from his first year at the Naval Academy for his mother's funeral. Franklin had stood in the doorway of that room for 11 minutes, watching his son sleep, memorizing the shape of his face. Elena's eyes, Elena's stubborn jaw, Elena's way of breathing deep and steady even in grief. He could not look at the boy without seeing her. And every time he saw her, he felt the failure crushing his chest like a weight he could not lift. She had been sick for 3 months. Pancreatic cancer, the doctors said. Stage 4 by the time they caught it. Franklin had survived 28 years of combat operations, had crawled through places that did not exist on any map, had held dying men in his arms, and kept fighting. But he could not save his wife. He could not do anything but hold her hand and watch the light leave her eyes on a Tuesday afternoon in April while their son sat in the hallway, too afraid to come inside. The memory hit him now as Winslow's grip tightened on his arm. He was back in that hospital room. The smell of antiseptic, the beep of monitors, Elena's voice, barely a whisper, her last words before she slipped away. "Take care of our boy, Frank. Promise me." He had promised. And then he had broken that promise in the worst possible way. The morning light was different now. He was standing at the security checkpoint, not the hospital. 3 officers surrounded him. Families watched with uncomfortable silence. But part of him was still there, still holding Elena's hand, still failing her with every breath he took. After the funeral, he had tried. He had sat across from Marcus at dinner and attempted to form words. But every time he looked at his son, he saw Elena laughing at their wedding. Elena holding Marcus as a baby. Elena teaching the boy to ride a bicycle while Franklin was deployed to a country he could never name. He saw every moment he had missed, every sacrifice she had made alone, every year she had waited for him to come home. And the guilt had become a living thing inside him, growing larger every day until it squeezed out everything else. He left on a Thursday, did not say goodbye, did not explain, just vanished like smoke. For the first 2 years, he had drifted. Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas. He worked day labor when he could find it, slept in shelters when they had room, slept under bridges when they did not. He stopped shaving, stopped caring about how he looked or smelled, or whether he lived to see another sunrise. The only thing he kept clean was the photograph. Marcus at 12 years old, grinning in his little league uniform after hitting his first home run. Franklin had been in Afghanistan when that happened. Elena had sent the photo to him through secure channels, and he had carried it through 3 more deployments before coming home for good. He carried it still. It was in his pocket right now, worn soft at the edges, creased from 10,000 touches. Somewhere in the 3rd year, he had ended up in Annapolis. He told himself it was coincidence, but he knew the truth. He had come to be close to Marcus without being seen, to watch from the shadows, to know his son was alive and thriving even if Franklin could never be part of that life again. He had found a spot under a bridge near the Severn River, a concrete alcove where the wind did not cut too deep in winter. He had made a home, and every Sunday morning, he walked the 4 miles to the cemetery where Elena was buried and sat beside her grave until the groundskeepers made him leave. "I am sorry," he would tell her. "I know I promised. I know I failed you, but he is better off without me. He is becoming the man you always knew he could be, and I would only drag him down." He had watched Marcus from a distance for 3 years, had seen him running with his company on early morning training exercises, had seen him in town once, laughing with friends outside a coffee shop, looking so much like Elena that Franklin had to turn away before the tears came. He had even found a spot on the hill overlooking the practice fields where he could watch Marcus train without being noticed. He knew things a father should not have to learn from observation. He knew Marcus had made the SEAL pipeline, knew he had completed BUD/S, the brutal selection program that broke most men who attempted it, knew he was graduating today at the top of his class, receiving an award that Franklin had read about in a discarded newspaper, the Naval Academy Athletic Association sword, given to the graduating midshipman who had best demonstrated excellence in athletics. His boy, Elena's boy, their boy, and Franklin had walked 7 miles through the dawn to stand behind a tree and watch him receive it. He had not planned to go through the checkpoint. He had planned to circle around to the public viewing area at the edge of the grounds, where the tree line provided cover and no one would look twice at an old man standing in the shadows. But he had misjudged the security perimeter, had walked too close, and now Captain Winslow's fingers were digging into his arm, and 3 officers were closing in, and everything he had carefully avoided for 6 years was about to collapse. "I just wanted to see him," Franklin said, so quietly that only Winslow could hear. "That is all. I just wanted to see my son." Winslow laughed. His grip tightened. "Sure you did, and I'm sure he would be thrilled to see you." His voice dripped with contempt. "Father of the Year material, right here, folks." Franklin felt something shift inside him. A cold stillness that had kept him alive through 19 hours on a bridge in Ramadi. A focus that had allowed him to place 31 shots in 31 targets, while enemy fire tore the concrete around him. He did not let it show on his face, but it was there, rising from somewhere deep, responding to the threat. He could have broken free, could have disabled all 4 men before they understood what was happening. 28 years of training did not disappear just because the body aged. But he did not move. He did not resist. Because his son was 300 yards away, preparing for the most important moment of his young life, and Franklin would not do anything to disrupt that, even if it meant being dragged away in handcuffs, even if it meant never seeing Marcus receive the sword, even if it meant his boy never knowing that his father had been there at all. Take me wherever you need to take me, Franklin said. Just please, let me watch from a distance. I will not make a sound. I will not move. I just want to see him one more time. Winslow's face twisted with disgust. He yanked Franklin forward, forcing him to stumble. And in that moment, as the old man caught his balance with the instinctive grace of a trained operator, Petty Officer Rodriguez saw the full sleeve ride up. He saw the coordinates, the date, the trident, the initials SR, and he understood exactly who was being dragged toward detention. His voice came out strangled, desperate. Sir, Captain Winslow, you need to stop. Right now, you need to stop. Winslow did not stop. He had spent 12 years in the Navy without ever hearing a shot fired in anger, and he had learned to compensate for that absence on his record by projecting authority in every interaction. He was not about to let some junior enlisted sailor question his judgment in front of a crowd. Rodriguez, he said without turning, if you say one more word, I will have you written up for insubordination before this ceremony even starts. He jerked Franklin forward again. Now move. The three backup officers fell into formation around them, creating a box that prevented escape. Not that the old man was trying to escape. He moved with them willingly, his gait steady despite the rough handling, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance that only he could see. The tree line, the white chairs, the stage where his son would stand in less than 2 hours. The families in line watched in silence. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others pulled out phones, the instinct to document overriding the instinct to intervene. A mother covered her young daughter's eyes. An elderly man in a veteran's cap frowned deeply, something about the scene troubling him in ways he could not articulate. Rodriguez did not follow orders. He could not, because he had spent 3 years of his life studying naval special warfare history, and he had written his senior thesis at the Academy on the Battle of Ramadi. He knew the coordinates inked into that old man's arm the way a priest knows scripture. 33.4279 degrees north, 43.2994 degrees east. The bridge over the Euphrates. November 15th, 2006. The day a single SEAL sniper held off an enemy force for 19 hours to save 47 Marines trapped in a kill zone. The day that created the legend of Wraith. Rodriguez broke formation and ran ahead, positioning himself in front of the group. Captain, please. I am begging you. You do not understand who this is. Winslow stopped. His face reddened with fury. Petty Officer Rodriguez, you are relieved. Report to the command post and wait for me there. I will deal with your insubordination after the ceremony. Sir, Rodriguez's voice cracked. Those coordinates on his arm. I know what they mean. I studied that operation. If this is who I think it is, you are about to arrest one of the most decorated SEALs in the history of naval special warfare. For a moment, something flickered in Winslow's eyes. Doubt perhaps, or the first cold tendril of fear. But he had committed too publicly now. Too many people had seen him assert his authority. Too many phones were recording. He could not back down without looking weak. Anyone can get a tattoo, Winslow said. His voice was slightly less certain than before, but he pressed forward. This proves nothing. He turned to the old man, releasing his arm but blocking his path. All right, you want to claim you are some kind of war hero? Prove it. Tell me your name. Tell me your rank. Tell me your unit. Franklin stood very still. The morning sun was rising higher now, casting long shadows across the checkpoint. In the distance, he could hear the Naval Academy band warming up, brass instruments catching the light as musicians took their positions. His son was out there somewhere, preparing for the greatest day of his young life. He could have walked away, could have accepted the humiliation and disappeared back into the shadows where he had lived for 6 years. No one would have known. Marcus would have received his sword and graduated with honors and never learned that his father had been there at all. But something had shifted inside him when Winslow grabbed his arm. Something old and cold and precise. The same thing that had kept him alive on that bridge in Ramadi. The same thing that had allowed him to watch his spotter die in his arms and keep fighting. He was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being invisible. My name is Franklin Evercobb, he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Master Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, retired. 28 years of service. My son is Ensign Marcus James Cobb. He is graduating today. He is receiving the sword. Rodriguez made a sound like he had been punched in the stomach. Winslow's eyes narrowed. He had expected stammering, confusion, the defensive posture of a liar caught in his lie. Instead, the old man stood at perfect attention, shoulders back, chin level, hands at his sides. The posture of a man who had spent decades answering to that stance. Master Chief, Winslow repeated, letting skepticism drip from every syllable. And I suppose you have documentation to prove this? A military ID, perhaps? DD-214? Franklin shook his head slowly. I have been living under a bridge for 5 years, Captain. I do not have documentation. I do not have anything except what I carry. Winslow smiled. It was the smile of a man who believed he had won. Then I'm afraid we have a problem. Because without documentation, you are just another transient making claims he cannot support. He gestured to the backup officers. Take him to holding. We will sort this out after the ceremony. Wait, Rodriguez said. He stepped forward, his hand raised. The dog tags. Check his dog tags. Winslow hesitated. If he is lying, Rodriguez pressed, the tags will prove it. But if he is telling the truth, sir, and you arrest him anyway, your career is over. He paused, letting that sink in. I have seen photographs of the tattoo that Sniper had. It matches. The coordinates. The date. The trident. I am telling you, Captain. Check the tags before you do something you cannot take back. The crowd had grown larger now. Word had spread through the checkpoint line that something was happening. Families pressed closer, phones raised, watching the confrontation unfold. In the VIP parking area, a black sedan had pulled up, and a man in dress whites with stars on his collar was stepping out, flanked by aides. Winslow did not notice. His attention was fixed on the old man, on the chain barely visible beneath the collar of the donated coat. His mind was calculating odds. If the vagrant was lying, checking the tags would prove it and justify everything Winslow had done. If he was telling the truth, Winslow refused to consider that possibility. Fine, he said. He reached toward the old man's collar. You want to play this game? Let us see what those tags actually say. His fingers closed around the chain and pulled. 2 sets of dog tags emerged into the morning light. 2 sets, hanging together, worn smooth by decades of contact with skin. Winslow held them up, squinting at the stamped letters. The first set read, Cobb, Franklin E., 123456789. Upos, Catholic, USN. The second set read, Reyes, Samuel J., 987654321. Aneg, no preference. USN. Winslow's brow furrowed. Who is Samuel Reyes? Rodriguez answered before Franklin could speak. His voice was barely a whisper. Petty Officer 2nd Class Samuel Reyes. SEAL Team 3. Killed in action, November 15, 2006. He was silent for a moment. He was the spotter. He died on that bridge. Franklin's jaw tightened. His eyes glistened. He did not speak. And across the parade ground, stepping out of the black sedan, Admiral Theodore Hawthorne heard raised voices at the security checkpoint and began walking toward the commotion. He did not know why. Something in his gut told him to move. Something that had kept him alive for 40 years in the Navy. Something that was about to bring him face to face with the man who had saved his life. The bridge had been a death trap from the beginning. Franklin knew it the moment he settled into position on the rooftop, overlooking the Euphrates crossing. November in Ramadi meant cold nights and colder dawns, and he had been lying prone on concrete for 6 hours before the convoy even appeared on the horizon. Samuel Reyes was beside him, working the spotting scope with a quiet efficiency that had made him the best spotter Franklin had ever known. They had been partners for 4 years, had survived Fallujah together, had pulled each other out of more firefights than either could count. Samuel was 26 years old, engaged to a girl named Maria back in San Diego, and he talked about her constantly during the long hours of waiting. She wants 3 kids, Samuel had said that morning, his breath fogging in the cold air. I told her too. She said we would compromise it for her. He had laughed softly. I do not think she understands how compromise works. Franklin had smiled. He had shown Samuel the photograph of Marcus in his Little League uniform, the one Elena had sent 2 weeks earlier. My boy hit his first home run, he had said. I missed it. Again. Samuel had looked at the photo for a long moment. He is going to be tall like you. Probably play ball in high school. You will make it to those games, Chief. We're going to get through this deployment, and you're going to watch your son play ball. That was the last normal conversation they ever had. The convoy appeared at 0700. 47 Marines in armored vehicles, crossing the bridge as part of a routine patrol. Franklin watched them through his scope, tracking their progress, scanning the buildings on the far side for threats. Everything looked clear. Everything looked routine. Then the first RPG streaked out of a window, and the lead vehicle exploded into flames. The ambush came from everywhere at once. Automatic weapons fire from 3 buildings. RPGs from elevated positions. The Marines were caught in the open, their vehicles burning, their retreat cut off by debris that had been prepositioned during the night. It was a kill box. A perfect, methodical kill box designed to slaughter every American on that bridge. Franklin's radio crackled with desperate voices. Contact, contact, contact. We're taking heavy fire. We cannot move. Anyone on this net, we need immediate support. He was already firing. The Barrett M82 roared, and a shooter in a third-floor window dropped. Samuel called adjustments. 2 degrees left. Elevation -1. Target acquired. Franklin fired again. Another body fell. But there were too many. For every insurgent he dropped, 2 more appeared. The Marines on the bridge were dying. He could hear in their radio calls. The panic, the prayers, the screaming. Wraith, this is Viper 6. The voice was young, terrified. A lieutenant, Franklin would later learn. A man named Theodore Hawthorne. We are pinned down. We have 7 wounded, 2 Kia. We cannot hold this position. Request immediate extraction support. Franklin made the calculation in less than a second. The Marines needed time. Time to stabilize their wounded. Time for air support to arrive. Time to find an escape route off that bridge. And the only way to buy them that time was to make himself the primary target. Samuel, he said, I need you to relocate to the secondary position. Call in air support. I will hold them here. Samuel's head snapped toward him. Chief, that is suicide. There are at least 30 shooters in those buildings. You cannot hold them alone. I'm not asking, Franklin said. His voice was calm. Cold. The voice he used when there was no room for argument. Get to secondary. Call on the birds. Keep those Marines alive. Samuel held his gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. He grabbed his gear. He moved toward the stairwell. He made it 4 steps before the RPG hit. The explosion threw Franklin backward, slamming him into a concrete barrier. His ears rang. His vision blurred. When he could see again, Samuel was lying in a pool of spreading crimson, his body torn open by shrapnel, his eyes already going glassy. Franklin crawled to him, pulled him close, pressed his hands against wounds that could not be closed. Samuel's lips moved. Blood bubbled between them. Not your fault, Chief. His voice was barely a whisper. Never your fault. Hold the line. I will see you on the other side. He died in Franklin's arms 90 seconds later. And then Franklin did something that would become legend. He picked up his rifle. He wiped the blood from his hands onto his pants. And he returned to his position overlooking the bridge. For 19 hours, he did not move. He did not eat. He did not sleep. He fired until his barrel glowed red, and he had to swap to Samuel's weapon. He fired until his shoulder was a mass of bruises and his fingers bled from working the bolt. He fired until the sun set and rose again, and the extraction helicopters finally appeared on the horizon. 31 confirmed kills. 47 Marines saved. 1 spotter dead. They gave him the Navy Cross for that day. He did not remember the ceremony. He did not remember the handshakes or the speeches or the photographs. All he remembered was Samuel's last words, playing on an endless loop in his mind. Not your fault. Never your fault. But it was his fault. He had sent Samuel to that stairwell. He had given the order that put his spotter in the path of that RPG. And no medal, no commendation, no grateful Marine could ever change that truth. Now, standing at the security checkpoint with Winslow's fingers still gripping his dog tags. Franklin felt the weight of that day pressing down on him. He had carried Samuel's tags for 18 years, had talked to him every night before sleep, had apologized 1,000 times for the order that killed him. "Still here, brother," he whispered, so quietly that no one else could hear. "Still trying." And across the parade ground, Admiral Theodore Hawthorne was walking faster now. Something about the old man's silhouette had triggered a memory buried deep. The way he stood, the set of his shoulders, the absolute stillness that spoke of decades spent waiting in positions where movement meant death. Hawthorne did not know yet, but his body remembered. His instincts remembered. The man who had saved his life was 50 yards away, and in less than 3 minutes, the truth would finally come to light. Admiral Theodore Hawthorne had told the story of that bridge 100 times. He had told it at officer training schools and war colleges. He had told it at memorial services and retirement ceremonies. He had told it to his children when they asked what war was really like, editing out the blood and the screaming and the way men prayed to God when they thought they were about to die. But he had never found the man who saved him. The sniper's call sign was Wraith. That much Hawthorne knew. The after-action reports had been heavily redacted, the operator's true identity buried under layers of classification that even a vice admiral could not penetrate. All Hawthorne had was a call sign, a set of coordinates, and a memory that visited him every November 15th without fail. He had been 29 years old that day, a lieutenant commander with a promising career and a young wife waiting at home. When the ambush started, when his vehicle exploded and his men started dying, he had been certain he would never see her again. He had lain behind a concrete barrier with shrapnel in his leg and bullets snapping overhead, and he had made peace with the fact that this bridge in Ramadi would be his grave. Then the voice came over the radio. "Calm, cold, absolutely certain. This is Wraith. I have Overwatch. Hold your positions. I will cover your extraction." For 19 hours, that voice had been the only thing keeping them alive. Every time an insurgent appeared in a window, a shot rang out and the threat disappeared. Every time the enemy tried to advance, Wraith cut them down. Hawthorne had counted the shots at first, trying to keep his mind focused on something other than the pain in his leg. He lost count somewhere after 20. When the helicopters finally arrived, when the surviving Marines were loaded onto stretchers and flown to safety, Hawthorne had looked back at the rooftop where the sniper had been positioned. He saw a single figure standing at the edge, silhouetted against the rising sun. The figure did not wave, did not acknowledge the rescue, just stood there, still as stone, watching them go. Hawthorne had spent 19 years trying to find that man, had pulled every string, called in every favor, submitted every request. The answer was always the same. Classified. Need to know. Above your clearance level. Eventually, he had stopped looking, had accepted that some debts could never be repaid, had contented himself with telling the story and hoping that somehow, somewhere, Wraith would hear it and know that the men he saved had never forgotten. Now, walking across the parade ground toward the commotion at the security checkpoint, Hawthorne felt something stirring in his chest, a recognition that bypassed his conscious mind and spoke directly to his bones. The old man being held by security officers stood with a particular stillness, a patience that came from decades of lying motionless in sniper positions, a calm that remained unbroken even as a captain screamed in his face. Hawthorne had seen that stillness before, on a rooftop in Ramadi. 19 years ago, his pace quickened. At the checkpoint, Winslow was still holding the dog tags, reading the names stamped into the metal. His confidence had begun to crack. The second set of tags, the ones bearing a dead man's name, had introduced a variable he had not anticipated. Men who bought fake dog tags at surplus stores did not typically carry the tags of fallen comrades. "This does not prove anything," Winslow said, but his voice had lost its theatrical edge. "Anyone could have obtained these tags. Stolen valor is more sophisticated than you think." Rodriguez stepped forward. His hands were shaking. "Sir, with respect, I do not believe this man is lying. I have studied the Battle of Ramadi extensively. The tattoo on his arm matches documented photographs of the sniper's markings. The coordinates are exact. The date is exact. The initials SR match Petty Officer Reyes, who was killed in action during that operation. Winslow's jaw tightened. And I'm telling you, Petty Officer, that we cannot release a potential security threat based on a tattoo and some dog tags. He turned back to Franklin. If you're who you claim to be, then you will have no problem waiting and holding while we verify your identity through official channels. Franklin said nothing. His eyes had moved past Winslow, past the security officers, to a point somewhere in the middle distance. The VIP section, the white chairs, the stage where his son would stand. I understand, he said quietly. Do what you need to do. I only ask that you let me know when the ceremony is over. I would like to know that my son received his award. Winslow opened his mouth to respond, but he never got the chance. A voice cut across the checkpoint. A voice accustomed to command. A voice that made every uniformed officer in the vicinity snap to attention. What is happening here? Admiral Theodore Hawthorne stepped into the circle of security officers. His dress whites gleamed in the morning sun. The stars on his collar caught the light. His face was stone, but his eyes were moving rapidly, taking in the scene. The homeless man in the donated coat. The dog tags dangling from Winslow's fingers. The tattoo visible on the old man's forearm. The coordinates. The date. The trident. Hawthorne's breath caught in his throat. He had stared at those coordinates every day for 19 years. They were engraved on a plaque in his office. They were tattooed on his own shoulder, gotten on the 10th anniversary of the battle, a permanent reminder of the debt he owed. He knew those numbers the way he knew his own name. His eyes lifted from the tattoo to the old man's face. Weathered, worn, aged by years of hardship and exposure. But the eyes were the same. Calm, patient. The eyes of a man who could wait for hours without moving. The eyes of a man who had held a bridge alone while 47 Marines escaped to safety. Hawthorne's voice came out broken, barely a whisper, but in the sudden silence of the checkpoint, everyone heard it. Wraith? The old man's chin lifted slightly. His shoulders, already straight, squared just a fraction more. Muscle memory taking over. The posture of a man answering to a name he had not heard spoken aloud in almost 2 decades. He did not confirm it, did not deny it. He simply met the Admiral's eyes and held the gaze without flinching. And Admiral Theodore Hawthorne, Vice Admiral of the United States Navy, keynote speaker for today's graduation, felt tears begin to stream down his face. The checkpoint had gone silent. Not the ordinary quiet of people waiting in line, but the absolute stillness that falls when something sacred is unfolding. Families who had been checking their phones lowered them. Security officers who had been reaching for handcuffs let their arms drop. Even the distant sound of the Naval Academy band seemed to fade, as if the entire world had paused to witness what was happening. Admiral Hawthorne stood 3 feet from the man he had spent 19 years trying to find. Tears cut tracks down his weathered cheeks, but he made no move to wipe them away. His eyes never left the old man's face. "I'll look for you," Hawthorne said. His voice was thick with emotion. "For 19 years, I looked for you. I submitted requests. I called in favors. I begged everyone I knew with security clearance to tell me your name." He paused, struggling to control his breathing. "They told me you did not exist, that the operation was classified, that I would never know who saved my life." Franklin stood motionless. The stillness that had served him through decades of combat now served a different purpose. It held together pieces of himself that threatened to shatter under the weight of this moment. "I was just doing my job, Admiral," he said quietly. Hawthorne shook his head violently. "No, do not do that. Do not diminish what you did." He stepped closer, close enough that only Franklin could hear his next words. "I was lying behind a concrete barrier with shrapnel in my leg, watching my men die. I had made peace with it. I had already said goodbye to my wife in my head. And then your voice came over the radio, and you told us to hold on. You told us you had Overwatch." He paused, and for 19 hours, you kept that promise. Captain Winslow had not moved. The dog tag still dangled from his fingers, but his hand had gone slack. His face had drained of color. He was beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake, though the full weight of it had not yet landed. "Sir," Winslow said, his voice small, "I had no way of knowing." He looked like a transient. He had no documentation. Protocol clearly states. Hawthorne turned on him with a fury that made the captain physically recoil. "Protocol?" His voice cracked like a whip. "You want to talk to me about protocol?" He pointed at Franklin without looking away from Winslow. This man held a bridge for 19 hours with no sleep, no food, and no relief. He killed 31 enemy combatants. He saved 47 Marines, including me. He watched his spotter die in his arms and kept fighting. He stepped closer to Winslow, and the captain stumbled backward. "And you were about to arrest him for wanting to watch his son graduate." The crowd had grown larger. Word was spreading through the arriving families that something extraordinary was happening at the security checkpoint. Phones were raised. Videos were recording. The story was already beginning to take on a life of its own. Rodriguez stood off to the side, tears streaming down his face. He had studied the Battle of Ramadi for 3 years, had written papers about the tactical decisions, the impossible odds, the single sniper who had turned the tide. And now that sniper was standing 10 feet away, wearing a donated coat and boots held together with tape. "Admiral," Franklin said softly, "I appreciate your words, but I did not come here for recognition. I came here to see my son." Hawthorne turned back to him, the anger drained from his face, replaced by something softer, something like understanding. "Your son," he repeated. "Ensign Marcus Cobb, the SEAL candidate." Franklin nodded. Hawthorne was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle. "How long has it been since you spoke to him?" Franklin's jaw tightened. 6 years. The Admiral did not ask why. He had seen enough broken veterans to know that the answer would be complicated. That would involve wounds invisible to the eye. That would carry weight no metal could measure. "He is graduating top of his class," Hawthorne said. "Did you know that?" Franklin's eyes glistened. "I know. I have been watching from a distance. Every training run, every ceremony I could see from the perimeter. I know everything about his time here." Hawthorne studied him for a long moment. Then he reached out and took the dog tags from Winslow's unresisting fingers. He held them carefully, reading the names again. "Franklin Cobb, Samuel Reyes." "You carried his tags all this time," Hawthorne said. It was not a question. Franklin touched the chain around his neck, the phantom weight of the tags now in the Admiral's hands. "Every day since the bridge. I promised him I would." Hawthorne nodded slowly. He understood that promise. He had made similar ones to men who did not come home. "Chief," he said, using the rank Franklin had earned through decades of service, "you're not going to watch your son from behind a tree. Not today." Franklin's composure cracked for the first time. His voice came out rough. "Admiral, I cannot. He does not know I am here. He thinks I abandoned him." He looked down at his donated clothes, his taped boots, his unwashed hands. "And look at me. I cannot let him see me like this. Not on his day." Hawthorne stepped forward and placed a hand on Franklin's shoulder. The weight of it was steady, anchoring. "With respect, Chief, you are wrong." He squeezed gently. "Your son has spent 6 years wondering if his father was alive or dead. He has searched for you. Did you know that? I reviewed his personnel file when he applied for the SEAL program. He listed your disappearance as his primary motivation for joining. He wants to be the kind of man you were." Franklin's breath caught. "He does not want a father in a pressed uniform," Hawthorne continued. "He just wants his father. Alive. Present. Real." The Admiral released his shoulder and turned to Winslow, who stood pale and trembling. "Captain," Hawthorne said, his voice cold, "you are relieved of command. Report to the superintendent's office after the ceremony. There will be an inquiry into your conduct." Winslow opened his mouth, closed it, and finally managed a strangled, "Yes, sir." Hawthorne turned back to Franklin. He held out the dog tags. "These belong to you, Chief." He waited for Franklin to take them. "And so does a seat at your son's graduation. Will you let me escort you?" Franklin looked at the tags in the Admiral's outstretched hand. 30 years of service. 18 years of carrying a dead man's memory. 6 years of watching from the shadows. All of it led to this moment. His hand trembled as he reached out. And somewhere across the parade ground, Ensign Marcus James Cobb was taking his seat in the front row, unaware that his life was about to change forever. Franklin's fingers closed around the dog tags. The metal was warm from being held, and the familiar weight of them settled against his palm like an old friend returning home. He slipped the chain back over his head, tucking the tags beneath his shirt where they had rested for 18 years. Samuel's tags clinked softly against his own. "Still here, brother," he whispered. Admiral Hawthorne watched the gesture with understanding. He had his own rituals, his own ghosts. Every man who had seen combat carried the dead with him in one way or another. "Are you ready, Chief?" Hawthorne asked. Franklin looked down at himself. The coat that did not fit. The pants hemmed by hand in a shelter bathroom. The boots wrapped with electrical tape. He had not seen his reflection in weeks, but he knew what he looked like. He knew what others saw when they looked at him. "Admiral," he said slowly, "I cannot walk into that ceremony like this. I'm not ashamed of what I have become. But my son is receiving the highest athletic honor the Academy gives. He will be surrounded by admirals and senators and families in their finest clothes." He paused. "I will not let my appearance take away from his moment." Hawthorne considered this for a long moment. Then he turned to one of his aides, a young lieutenant who had been standing at a respectful distance. "Lieutenant Chun," the admiral said, "I need you to find the commandant of midshipmen. Tell him I require a set of dress whites, size for a man approximately 6'2", 180 pounds. Tell him I need them in 15 minutes. And tell him this request comes with my personal authorization." The lieutenant's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded without hesitation. "Yes, sir." He turned and sprinted toward the main academic building. Hawthorne looked back at Franklin. "You served this country for 28 years, Chief. You earned the right to wear that uniform. And today, you're going to wear it." Franklin shook his head. "Admiral, I have been out for over a decade. I cannot just put on dress whites and walk into a military ceremony. There are regulations." Hawthorne's eyes hardened with a determination that had carried him through 4 decades of service. "Chief, I'm a Vice Admiral of the United States Navy. I am the keynote speaker for this graduation, and I am telling you that today, regulations will accommodate the circumstances." He stepped closer. "You're going to put on that uniform. You're going to walk into that ceremony, and you're going to watch your son receive his award from a seat in the front row. Is that understood?" Franklin held the admiral's gaze. For a moment, he was not a homeless man in donated clothes. He was Master Chief Petty Officer Franklin Cobb, answering to a superior officer. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. The next 15 minutes passed in a blur. Lieutenant Chun returned with a garment bag containing dress whites that had been hastily assembled from the Academy's ceremonial supply. A security officer led Franklin to a private room in the nearby administration building where he could change. Hawthorne waited outside, fielding questions from confused staff members with the quiet authority of a man who had long since stopped explaining himself. Inside the room, Franklin stripped off the donated clothes that had been his uniform for years. He folded them carefully and set them aside. Then he looked at the dress whites hanging on the door. The uniform was pristine, crisp white fabric pressed to perfection, gold buttons polished to a mirror shine. The collar insignia of a Master Chief Petty Officer had been attached, along with a basic ribbon rack that did not begin to represent the full scope of Franklin's service, but would suffice for the day. He dressed slowly, each button fastened with precision, each crease aligned with care. When he slipped his arms through the sleeves and settled the jacket on his shoulders, something shifted inside him. Something that had been dormant for 6 years began to stir. He looked at himself in the mirror. The face that stared back was weathered, aged, marked by years of living rough. But the uniform fit as if it had been tailored for him. And in the eyes looking back from the glass, Franklin saw something he had not seen in a long time. Purpose. He tucked the dog tags beneath the white fabric, adjusted the collar, squared his shoulders, and for the first time in 6 years, he saw the man Elena had married. The man Marcus had called Dad. The man who had held a bridge for 19 hours and carried his dead spotter's tags across the world. He was still in there, buried beneath the grief and the guilt and the years of running. But he was still in there. A knock came at the door. "Chief." Hawthorne's voice. The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. Are you ready? Franklin took one last look in the mirror. He thought of Elena, her voice in his memory. Take care of our boy, Frank. Promise me. He had broken that promise once. He would not break it again. He opened the door. Admiral Hawthorne stood in the hallway, and when he saw Franklin in dress whites, his face transformed. The homeless man was gone. In his place stood a Master Chief Petty Officer of the United States Navy. Straight-backed, square-shouldered, eyes clear and focused. Hawthorne saluted. The gesture was unexpected. Admirals did not salute enlisted men. Protocol demanded the opposite. But Hawthorne held the salute, his eyes glistening. I have waited 19 years to do this properly, Hawthorne said. Welcome back, Chief. Franklin returned the salute. The muscle memory was instant. Perfect, as if he had never stopped. Thank you, Admiral. Hawthorne lowered his hand and smiled. Now, let us go watch your son graduate. They walked together toward the parade ground. The sun was fully up now, casting golden light across the Academy's historic buildings. Families streamed toward Warden's Field, filling the white chairs, buzzing with excitement and anticipation. And in the front row, Ensign Marcus James Cobb sat with his company, waiting for the ceremony to begin. He did not know that his father was alive, did not know that his father was here, did not know that in less than an hour, everything he believed about the last 6 years would shatter. He did not know that he was about to be found. Warden's Field stretched before them like a sea of white. 1,200 midshipmen sat in perfect formation, their dress uniforms brilliant against the green of the parade ground. Behind them, thousands of family members filled row after row of chairs, programs clutched in hands, cameras ready, tissues already emerging from purses and pockets. The stage rose at the far end of the field, draped in navy blue and gold. The podium bore the Naval Academy seal. American flags flanked both sides, stirring gently in the morning breeze. Distinguished guests filled the VIP section. Senators, admirals, Pentagon officials, and men whose names appeared in classified files that would never see the light of day. Franklin walked beside Admiral Hawthorne through the side entrance reserved for dignitaries. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his stride remained steady. The dress whites moved with him like a second skin, the uniform he had worn for 28 years, remembering his body even as his body remembered it. Staff members and security personnel turned to look as they passed. Word had spread quickly. The story of the homeless veteran at the checkpoint was already moving through the crowd in whispers and text messages. Several officers saluted as Franklin walked by. He returned each salute with the precision of a man who had spent 3 decades perfecting the gesture. Hawthorne led him to the VIP section at the front of the audience area. Empty seats waited in the second row, reserved for the Admiral's personal guests. Hawthorne gestured for Franklin to sit. I have to take my place on the stage, Hawthorne said quietly. The ceremony will begin in 10 minutes. He paused, studying Franklin's face. Your son is in the 3rd company. Front row, left side. When they call his name for the award, he will walk to the stage and receive it from the superintendent. Franklin's eyes were already searching the rows of midshipmen. So many young faces, so many futures about to begin, and somewhere among them, the boy he had left behind. He found him, 3rd row from the front, just as Hawthorne had said. Marcus sat with his back straight and his chin level, the posture of a man who had earned his place through years of sacrifice. His profile was so like Elena's that Franklin's breath caught. The same jawline, the same way of holding his head. Even from 50 yards away, Franklin could see his wife and their son. Marcus was 24 years old now, a man grown, a SEAL candidate, top of his class. Everything Franklin had dreamed for him and more. And he had no idea his father was watching. Admiral, Franklin said, his voice rough, how do I do this? How do I face him after 6 years of silence? Hawthorne placed a hand on his shoulder. You tell him the truth. You tell him you love him. And you let him decide what happens next. He squeezed gently. But Chief, from everything I've seen in his file, that young man has never stopped looking for you. He hired private investigators. He filed missing persons reports. Every leave he had, he spent searching. The Admiral's eyes held Franklin's. He wants his father back. The only question is whether you are ready to be found. Franklin was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Hawthorne released his shoulder. I will see you after the ceremony, Chief. And I meant what I said earlier. The debt I owe you can never be repaid. But I intend to spend the rest of my life trying. He turned and walked toward the stage, leaving Franklin alone in the sea of families. The ceremony began with the precision of a military operation. The color guard presented the flags. The national anthem echoed across the field. The superintendent delivered opening remarks about honor, courage, and commitment. Franklin heard none of it. His eyes never left Marcus. He watched his son sit at attention through the speeches. Watched him laugh quietly at something a classmate whispered. Watched him check his watch once, twice, the nervous energy of a young man waiting for his moment. Every gesture was familiar. Every mannerism was Elena's. Franklin's hand moved to his chest, pressing against the dog tags beneath his uniform. Samuel's tags, his own, and somewhere deeper, the wedding ring on his chain that he had worn since the day Elena died. I'm here, he thought. After 6 years of running, I am finally here. The awards portion of the ceremony began. Names were called. Midshipmen rose from their seats and walked to the stage to receive honors. Each one shook hands with the superintendent. Each one posed for photographs. Each one returned to their seat amid applause. And then the superintendent's voice rang out across the field. The Naval Academy Athletic Association Sword is awarded annually to the graduating midshipman who has demonstrated excellence in athletics while maintaining outstanding academic and military performance. This year's recipient has distinguished himself not only as a varsity athlete, but as a future naval special warfare officer. He has completed basic underwater demolition SEAL training and will report to SEAL Team 4 following graduation. Franklin's heart stopped. Ladies and gentlemen, the superintendent continued, please join me in honoring this year's recipient of the Athletic Association Sword, Ensign Marcus James Cobb. The applause thundered across the field. 1,200 midshipmen clapped in perfect unison. Families rose to their feet. Cameras flashed. And Marcus stood. He rose from his seat with the fluid grace of an athlete and the discipline of a warrior. He straightened his uniform. He stepped into the aisle, and he began walking toward the stage. Franklin watched him come closer. 50 yards. 40. 30. His son was going to pass within 10 feet of where he sat. His hands were shaking. His vision blurred with tears he refused to let fall. 28 years of combat had never made him feel this afraid. 19 hours on a bridge in Ramadi had never made his heart pound this hard. Marcus walked past the VIP section. His eyes were fixed on the stage, on the superintendent waiting with the ceremonial sword. He did not look at the distinguished guests, did not glance at the admirals and senators. He did not see the Master Chief in dress whites who sat frozen in the second row. He did not see his father. Not yet. But as Marcus climbed the steps to the stage, Admiral Hawthorne stepped to the podium. And what he said next changed everything. Admiral Hawthorne gripped the edges of the podium and looked out across the sea of white uniforms. 1,200 faces looked back at him. Thousands more watched from the family sections. Cameras broadcast the ceremony to screens around the world. He had prepared a speech. 20 pages of carefully crafted remarks about duty, honor, and the obligations of those who serve. He had practiced it in his hotel room the night before, timing each pause for maximum effect. He set those pages aside. Before we continue with the presentation, Hawthorne said, his voice carrying across the field through the amplified speakers, I need to share something with all of you. Something that happened this morning. Something that I believe represents everything this ceremony is supposed to honor. Marcus stood at attention beside the superintendent, the ceremonial sword waiting on its velvet display. His brow furrowed slightly at the unexpected deviation from protocol, but his posture remained perfect. 19 years ago, Hawthorne continued, I was a lieutenant commander leading a convoy across a bridge in Ramadi, Iraq. We were ambushed. My vehicle was destroyed. 7 of my men were wounded. 2 were killed. We were trapped in a kill zone with no way out and no hope of survival. The crowd had gone silent. Even the rustle of programs had ceased. And then a voice came over my radio. Calm, steady, certain. The voice told me to hold my position. Told me he had Overwatch. Told me he would cover our extraction. Hawthorne paused, letting the weight of the memory settle. For 19 hours, that voice kept us alive. A single sniper, alone on a rooftop, holding off an enemy force that outnumbered him 30-1. He killed 31 insurgents. He watched his spotter die in his arms. And he never stopped fighting until every one of us was evacuated to safety. Marcus was listening intently now. Every midshipman on the field was listening. This was not the standard graduation speech. This was something else entirely. I never knew his name, Hawthorne said. His identity was classified. I spent 19 years trying to find him. 19 years wanting to thank him. 19 years carrying a debt I could never repay. He took a breath. This morning, I found him. A murmur rippled through the crowd. He was standing at the security checkpoint. Hawthorne continued, being detained by officers who did not recognize him. He was wearing donated clothes and boots held together with tape. He had walked 7 miles through the dawn to stand behind a tree and watch this ceremony from a distance. He was not asking for recognition. He was not asking for anything. He just wanted to see his son graduate. Marcus's face changed. Something flickered in his eyes. A recognition that had not yet fully formed. His name is Master Chief Petty Officer Franklin Everett Cobb, Hawthorne said. 28 years of service. Navy SEAL. Navy Cross recipient. Silver Star. Bronze Star with Valor. Purple Heart. He paused, letting each word land. His call sign was Wraith. And his son is standing on this stage right now. The gasp that swept through the crowd was audible. 1,200 heads turned. Thousands of eyes searched for the man Hawthorne had described. But Marcus did not look at the crowd. Marcus looked directly at the VIP section, at the second row, at the Master Chief in dress whites who sat frozen with tears streaming down his face. His lips formed a single word. No sound came out, but everyone watching could read it. Dad. The ceremonial sword was forgotten. The superintendent was forgotten. The 1,200 classmates and the thousands of family members and the cameras broadcasting to the world were all forgotten. Marcus moved. He did not walk. He ran, down the steps of the stage, his cover flying off behind him, across the grass that separated the stage from the VIP section, past admirals and senators who scrambled to clear a path. Franklin was on his feet. He did not remember standing. His body had moved without his permission, rising to meet his son. They collided in the aisle between the VIP rows. Marcus's arms wrapped around his father with a force that nearly knocked them both to the ground. Franklin gripped his son with equal desperation, clutching him the way a drowning man clutches a lifeline. 6 years of silence shattered in a single embrace. Dad. Marcus's voice broke on the word. Dad, you are alive. You are here. Franklin could not speak. The words would not come. All he could do was hold his son and let the tears fall and feel the warmth of another human being for the first time in 6 years. I am sorry, he finally managed. I am so sorry. I should never have left. I should never have. Marcus pulled back just enough to look at his father's face. His eyes were red. His cheeks were wet. But he was smiling. I do not care about that, Marcus said. I do not care about any of that. You are here. You are alive. That is all that matters. Franklin shook his head. I abandoned you. After your mother died, I could not look at you without seeing her. I thought I was protecting you by leaving. I thought. Marcus gripped his father's shoulders. Dad, stop. He waited until Franklin met his eyes. I have spent 6 years looking for you. 6 years wondering if you were alive or dead. 6 years praying that somehow, somewhere, I would find you again. He squeezed. And now you are here. In uniform. At my graduation. His voice cracked. This is the only thing I ever wanted. The crowd had risen to their feet. Not in organized applause, but in the spontaneous response of thousands of people witnessing something they would never forget. Some were crying. Some were cheering. Some simply stood in silence, bearing witness to a reunion that transcended anything the ceremony had planned. On the stage, Admiral Hawthorne watched with tears flowing freely down his face. The superintendent stood beside him, equally moved, the ceremonial sword still waiting on its velvet display. And in the aisle between the VIP rows, a father held his son and felt the pieces of his shattered life begin to reassemble. For the first time in 6 years, Franklin Cobb was not alone. The embrace lasted for what felt like hours. Father and son, locked together in the aisle between the VIP rows, unwilling to let go. Around them, the world continued to turn. The crowd continued to stand. The cameras continued to record. But for Franklin and Marcus, there was nothing else. Only this moment. Only each other. Finally, Marcus pulled back. He kept his hands on his father's shoulders, as if afraid that releasing him might cause him to vanish again. "How long?" Marcus asked. His voice was hoarse. "How long have you been here? In Annapolis?" Franklin's jaw tightened. 3 years. Marcus's face shifted. Confusion. Pain. Understanding. All of it cycling through in rapid succession. 3 years. You have been here for 3 years. And you never. "I watched you," Franklin said quietly. "Every morning run I could see from the perimeter. Every ceremony I could observe from outside the gates. I knew when you made the SEAL pipeline. I knew when you completed BUD/S. He paused. "I knew you were receiving the sword today." Marcus shook his head slowly. "I hired investigators. I filed missing persons reports. I searched every database I could access. And you were here. The whole time. You were right here. I cannot face you." Franklin's voice broke. "I looked at you and saw your mother. Every time. And the guilt of leaving, of breaking my promise to her, it was too much. I thought you were better off without me." Marcus's grip tightened on his father's shoulders. "Better off? Dad, I joined the SEALs because of you. Every decision I have made since you left was about finding you, about becoming the kind of man you were." He shook his head again. "I was never better off. I was just alone." The words hit Franklin like round from his own rifle. Each one precise. Each one devastating. He had spent 6 years telling himself that his absence was a gift. That Marcus would thrive without the burden of a broken father. That leaving was the kindest thing he could do. He had been wrong. Catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. "I am sorry," Franklin whispered. "It was inadequate. It would always be inadequate. But it was all he had." Marcus studied his father's face for a long moment. The weathered skin. The lines carved by years of hardship. The eyes that held decades of pain and loss and impossible choices. Then he did something Franklin did not expect. He smiled. "You are here now," Marcus said. "That is what matters. We can figure out the rest later." Admiral Hawthorne's voice carried across the field from the podium. "I apologize for the interruption to our program, but I believe we can all agree that some moments transcend protocol." He paused, letting the crowd's emotional murmur settle. "Ensign Cobb, when you are ready, your sword is waiting." Marcus looked toward the stage, then back his father. "Come with me," he said. Franklin shook his head. "Marcus, this is your moment." "I cannot." "Dad." Marcus's voice was firm, the voice of a man who had earned his place through years of sacrifice. "I'm not walking up there without you." Franklin looked at his son, 24 years old, a Navy SEAL candidate, top of his class, a man grown. But in his eyes, Franklin could still see the 12-year-old boy in the Little League photograph. The boy who had waited for his father to come home from deployments. The boy who had stood at his mother's grave in an ROTC uniform. The boy who had spent 6 years searching for a ghost. "Okay," Franklin said quietly. "Okay." They walked together toward the stage. The crowd parted before them. Officers saluted as they passed. Families reached out to touch Franklin's arm, to offer whispered words of thanks and welcome. The journey from the VIP section to the stage steps took less than a minute, but it felt like crossing a lifetime. At the base of the steps, Marcus paused. He turned to his father. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Before we go up there, I need you to know." Franklin waited. "The day you left," Marcus said, "I found the note on the kitchen table. I read it 100 times. I memorized every word. And I hated you for it. For months, I hated you." He paused. "But then I started training. Started learning what it takes to become a SEAL. started understanding what you must have gone through in your career. And the hate turned into something else. What? Franklin asked. Understanding, Marcus said. I do not know exactly what happened to you. I do not know what broke inside you when Mom died. But I know that whatever it was bigger than your ability to carry it alone. He reached out and gripped his father's arm. You are not weak for leaving, Dad. You were wounded. And wounded men sometimes run. It does not mean they stop loving the people they leave behind. Franklin's composure shattered. The tears he had been fighting since the embrace broke free, streaming down his face in rivers he could not control. His son, his boy, offering absolution he did not deserve. I never stopped loving you, Franklin managed. Not for a single day. I know, Marcus said. I always knew. He turned and extended his hand toward the stage steps. Come on, Dad. Let us go get my sword. They climbed the steps together. Father and son, Master Chief and Ensign. 2 generations of warriors reunited at last. The superintendent waited with the ceremonial sword gleaming on its velvet display. Admiral Hawthorne stood beside him, his face still wet with tears. The 1,200 midshipmen of the graduating class sat at attention, bearing witness to something that would become Academy legend. And as Marcus James Cobb received the Naval Academy Athletic Association sword, his father stood beside him, dressed in the uniform he had earned through 28 years of service. For the first time in 6 years, Franklin Cobb was exactly where he was supposed to be. The ceremony continued, but everything had changed. The remaining awards were presented. The diplomas were conferred. The graduating class recited their oath of office with voices that echoed across Warden's Field. But through it all, the story of the homeless veteran and his son rippled through the crowd in whispers and tears and photographs shared to phones around the world. Franklin stood at the edge of the stage, watching his son take his place among his classmates for the final traditions. The ceremonial hat toss, the cheers of 1,200 newly commissioned officers, the embrace of families flooding onto the field. Admiral Hawthorne appeared at Franklin's side. How does it feel, Chief? Franklin did not take his eyes off Marcus. Like waking up from a nightmare I thought would never end. Hawthorne nodded slowly. I need to tell you something. About Captain Winslow. Franklin's jaw tightened at the name. His career is over, Hawthorne said. There was no satisfaction in his voice. Only fact. The videos from the checkpoint have already spread across social media. The Navy cannot ignore what he did. He will face a formal inquiry, and based on what I witnessed, he will be separated from service. Franklin was silent for a moment. I do not take pleasure in another man's destruction, Admiral, even a man who treated me the way he did. Hawthorne studied him. That is because you are a better man than most. He paused, but there is something else. Winslow approached me an hour ago. He wanted to apologize to you personally. Franklin turned to look at the Admiral. What did you tell him? I told him that was your decision to make, not mine. Hawthorne gestured toward the edge of the field, where a figure in a disheveled uniform stood alone, watching the celebrations from a distance. He has been standing there since the ceremony ended, waiting. Franklin followed the Admiral's gaze. Captain Derek Winslow stood with his shoulders slumped, his brass no longer gleaming, his face carrying the weight of a man who had just watched his entire future collapse. He looked smaller than he had at the checkpoint, diminished. I will speak with him, Franklin said. Hawthorne raised an eyebrow. You do not have to. I know. Franklin's voice was quiet. But I spent 6 years carrying anger and guilt and shame. I am tired of carrying things that do not serve me. He looked back at his son, now surrounded by classmates and their families. Maybe it is time to start letting go. He walked across the field toward Winslow. The captain saw him coming and stiffened, his face cycling through fear, shame, and something that might have been hope. Master Chief Cobb, Winslow began, his voice unsteady. I do not know how to... Franklin held up a hand. Let me speak first. Winslow fell silent. This morning, Franklin said, you saw a homeless man in donated clothes trying to enter a military ceremony. You did what you thought was right. You were wrong. You were cruel. You humiliated me in front of families and fellow service members. He paused. And if I had not been who I am, if Admiral Hawthorne had not intervened, you would have had me arrested for wanting to see my son graduate. Winslow's eyes dropped to the ground. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Franklin studied the broken man before him. 12 years in the Navy. A career built on protocol and appearance. All of it crumbling because of one morning's arrogance. Captain, Franklin said, I spent 28 years in the SEAL teams. I have seen men do terrible things under pressure. I have seen good men make unforgivable choices. And I have learned that carrying hatred is heavier than carrying a rucksack full of ammunition. He stepped closer. I forgive you. Winslow's head snapped up. His eyes were wet. You what? I forgive you, Franklin repeated. Not because you deserve it. Not because what you did was acceptable, but because I refuse to carry the weight of your mistake for the rest of my life. He extended his hand. Learn from this day, Captain. Let make you better instead of bitter. Winslow stared at the offered hand. For a long moment, he did not move. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. I do not understand, Winslow said. How can you forgive me after what I did? Franklin shook his hand once, firmly, then released it. Because someone taught me that wounded men sometimes do terrible things. And the measure of a man is not in his worst moments. It is in what he does after. He turned and walked back toward the celebration, leaving Winslow standing alone with the weight of grace he had never expected to receive. Marcus was waiting for him, the ceremonial sword still in his hand. He had watched the exchange from across the field. What did you say to him? Marcus asked. Franklin put his arm around his son's shoulders. Something your mother would have wanted me to say. They stood together, watching the families celebrate around them. Graduates embraced parents. Photographs were taken. Laughter and tears mixed in the golden afternoon light. A woman approached them. She was in her mid-40s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore civilian clothes, but something in her bearing suggested military experience. Master Chief Cobb? She asked. Franklin turned. Yes? She extended her hand. My name is Dr. Catherine Vance. I run a reintegration program for combat veterans here in Annapolis. She shook his hand with a firm grip. I saw what happened today, and I wanted to offer my help. Franklin hesitated. I appreciate that, but I'm not sure Dad. Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. Listen to her. Dr. Vance smiled. I am not here to rescue you, Master Chief. I am here to walk beside you while you rescue yourself. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a simple business card. No paperwork, no bureaucracy. Just a place where men who have seen what you have seen can talk without judgment. She pressed the card into his hand. If you show up, you show up. If you do not, the door stays open. Franklin looked at the card, then at his son, then at the field full of families celebrating new beginnings. For 6 years, he had refused every offer of help. I believed he did not deserve kindness or support or a second chance. But standing here, in dress whites, with his son's arm around him and a woman offering hope without conditions, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe, he said slowly, it is time to stop running. Dr. Vance's smile widened. That is all I needed to hear. 3 months later, Franklin Cobb stood at the window of his small apartment overlooking the Severn River. The morning sun cast golden light across the water, and somewhere in the distance, a formation of midshipmen ran their daily route along the seawall. He watched them pass, remembering when he had watched from the shadows beneath the bridge, invisible and alone. The apartment was modest. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a living room with a couch that Dr. Vance's program had donated. On the walls hung 3 photographs. Elena on their wedding day, laughing at something Franklin had whispered in her ear. Marcus at 12, grinning in his Little League uniform. And a new one, taken on graduation day, father and son standing together on the stage at Warden's Field. Franklin touched the frame of the graduation photograph. 3 months, and he still could not quite believe it was real. The door opened behind him. Marcus walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee, still in his workout clothes from his morning training session. He had delayed his report to SEAL Team 4 by 2 weeks to help his father get settled. The Navy had approved the request without hesitation. You were up early, Marcus said, handing his father a cup. Old habits. Franklin took the coffee and inhaled the steam. I spent too many years sleeping when I could. Now I do not want to miss the mornings. They stood together at the window, watching the midshipmen disappear around a bend in the seawall. I talked to Admiral Hawthorne yesterday, Marcus said. He wants you to speak at the next graduation ceremony. Tell your story. He thinks it could help other veterans who are struggling. Franklin was quiet for a long moment. I'm not sure I am ready for that. Marcus nodded. He did not push. That was something Franklin had learned about his son over the past 3 months. Marcus understood that healing could not be rushed, that some wounds required time and patience and the steady presence of people who refuse to give up. Dr. Vance says you have been attending the group sessions, Marcus said. Franklin nodded. Twice a week. It is harder than anything I did in the teams. Sitting in a circle with other broken men, talking about the things we carry. He paused. But it helps. I am proud of you, Dad. The words landed softly. Franklin turned to look at his son. For so long, he had believed that pride flowed in only one direction, from parent to child. He had never expected to hear those words from Marcus, had never believed he deserved them. I have a long way to go, Franklin said. I know. Marcus smiled. But you are going. That is what matters. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. Then Marcus checked his watch. I have to get to the base, he said. Training evaluation today. He paused at the door. Dinner tonight? Franklin nodded. I will cook. Marcus grinned. That is a terrifying thought. I managed to keep myself alive for 28 years in combat zones. I think I can handle pasta. Marcus laughed. It was a sound Franklin had missed for 6 years. A sound he would never take for granted again. After his son left, Franklin dressed and walked to the cemetery where Elena was buried. It was a route he knew by heart, though now he walked it openly instead of hiding in the early morning hours before groundskeepers arrived. He sat beside her headstone, tracing the letters of her name with his finger. I found him, he said quietly. Or he found me. I'm not sure which. He paused. I'm trying, Elena. Every day, I'm trying to be the man you believed I was. The man you asked me to be when you left. The wind stirred the leaves of the oak tree that shaded her grave. Franklin chose to believe it was her answer. That afternoon, he walked to the community center where Dr. Vance ran her program. The building was unremarkable from the outside, just another brick structure in a row of similar buildings. But inside, it held something extraordinary, a room full of men who had seen the worst of humanity and were learning to find their way back. Franklin took his seat in the circle. 12 veterans, ranging in age from 23 to 71. Some had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, others in Vietnam. One had been at Khe Sanh. Another had cleared houses in Fallujah. All of them carried invisible wounds that the world could not see. Dr. Vance opened the session. We have a new member joining us today. She gestured toward a young man sitting at the edge of the circle, his hands clasped tight, his eyes fixed on the floor. He is not ready to share yet, and that is okay. He just needs to know he is not alone. Franklin studied the young man. Early 20s. The hollow look in his eyes. The way his leg bounced with nervous energy. The 1,000-yard stare that never quite focused on anything in the present. He had been that young man once. Lost. Broken. Convinced that the darkness would never lift. After the session ended, Franklin approached him. First time? He asked. The young man nodded without looking up. Franklin sat down beside him. I slept under a bridge for 5 years. Watched my son's life from the shadows because I thought I did not deserve to be part of it. Carried my dead spotter's dog tags and talked to him every night because he was the only one who understood. The young man finally looked up. His eyes were wet. How did you get out? He asked. Franklin was quiet for a moment. I stopped running. I let people help me. And I started believing that surviving was not betraying the dead. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the dog tags. Samuel's and his own, still hanging together. My spotter's last words to me were not your fault. It took me 18 years to believe him. The young man stared at the tags. I do not know if I could do this. Franklin placed a hand on his shoulder. You do not have to know. You just have to keep showing up. He stood. Same time next week. I will save you a seat. He walked out into the afternoon sunlight. The sky was clear. The air was warm. Somewhere across town, his son was training to become the warrior Franklin had once been. In Franklin Cobb, Master Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, retired, was finally learning to live again. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that second chances are possible and that heroes can be found in the most unexpected places, please subscribe to our channel. And right now on your screen, you will see another incredible story waiting for you. Click it, watch it, and remember that every person you pass on the street has a story. Some of them might just be legendary. Thank you for watching. He visited Elena's grave every Sunday. He attended group sessions twice a week. He cooked dinner for his son whenever Marcus could make it. And every morning, he stood at his window and watched the midshipmen run along the seawall, no longer hidden, no longer invisible, no longer alone. Still here, brother, he whispered to Samuel every night before sleep. Still trying. And this time, finally, I am not trying alone.